It comes right after, like we mentioned, Surah Al-Inshiqaq, and it's one of those, it's called one of these samawat. So the Prophet ﷺ used to recite this surah, Surah Al-Burooj and Surah Al-Tariq, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوج and وَالسَّمَاءِ وَالطَّارِقِ. In the Isha prayers, as has been narrated from the hadith, sometimes you would recite these two prayers, and they're referred to as samawat, the ones that start with the word sama, which means sky. This is also a Makki surah, which meaning it was revealed before the migration of the Prophet ﷺ to Medina, and it's believed to be the 27th chapter of the Quran in the order of revelation, in the order of the way in which these surahs came down. The theme of this surah is basically, the overall theme is talking about establishing the belief in the hereafter, but there is a specific warning to people that behave like tyrants and oppressors, and a consolation to the believers, because either the believers had already started feeling persecution or going through moments of persecution at this time, or they were about to face it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this surah where He talks about Ashabul Ukhdud, the people of the trench, and we'll go into detail about that. But in it is a description of the type of behavior that comes from an extremely oppressive and tyrannous ruler, and how, on the other hand, the believers, they deal with that kind of tyranny and that kind of oppression. So it serves two purposes: to warn again the disbelievers of Mecca as to their coming or ongoing oppression, and it serves as a consolation for the believers that other people have gone through much worse than you have, and here is how they dealt with it. So the surah starts, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالسَّمَاءِ ذَاتِ الْبُرُوجِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْمَوْعُودِ وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ. He swears by four things in the beginning of this surah, actually five, because with the first one, when Allah says by the sky containing Al-Burooj, right? So there's two things here: was-sama, that He's swearing by the sky, and a part of the sky which is Al-Burooj, which we'll talk about in a second, and the promised day, wal-yawm al-ma'ud, and the shahid and the mashhud, the witness and that which is witnessed. Allah Azza wa Jalla swears by these things, and what He swears by, or what He swears for, will come in the next ayah. But Al-Burooj, this is a reference to, as most of the scholars of Tafsir point out, the 12 or 13 pathways of the sun or the moon that are defined by what you commonly know as the constellations. And the sun and the moon, they pass through these constellations at different times of the year. So for 1 month period, the sun will pass through a certain group of stars, right? At another time, another group of stars. And these are the ones you commonly know of as, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Leo, Virgo, all these different names that you know of the grouping of the stars that we put together. These are different pathways. So the sun, basically passes through a group of stars which we define as Aries at a certain type of, in a certain time of the year, and it goes through that for a whole month, and so on and so forth. And these are things which mankind has historically, they've studied, they've figured out, and they used it to charter the seasons and so on and so forth based on the stars. But one of the opinions, or the mostly opinion of the Mufassirin, is that there are these 12 constellations or 13 constellations which exist, or star groupings that exist in the sky. It's important to differentiate between a couple things here. That is between astronomy and astrology, right? Astronomy is a science, the science of charting the stars and studying the planets and so on and so forth. Astrology is something different. It is not at all a science. It's just when people try to read the stars and come up with different types of things. So these names may sound familiar, and to a lot of people they may sound familiar because of what we find in in the newspapers of what is that called when you your zodiac signs, the horoscopes, right? Things like that. And this is not what we're referring to here at all. What we're referring to is the actual astronomical, grouping of the stars, which the sun and the moon pass through. Anything that has, fortune telling and things like that, these are not a part of Islam. These are not a part of our faith. And the Prophet ﷺ had serious warnings against, going to fortune tellers and believing in that kind of stuff. So again, we don't want to mix the two, right? These are actual astronomical groupings of the stars that the sun and the moon, they pass through, and Allah Azza wa Jalla is swearing by these great calculations that people have been able to make based on His creation. Another interpretation of Al-Burooj are towers in the sky. Basically, again, they're referring to the stars as these huge constructions that they are. And also, according to some of the other Sahaba, they were just the Al-Nujum al-Izam, the giant stars that you can clearly see that they stand out in the night sky. Right? So Allah Azza wa Jalla basically swearing by the sky and the stars that you see in the sky as well. And it's a beautiful sight, and these are things that we calculate our time by and the seasons by as well. But these are a proof of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He has made something again which is so far away, yet it is so useful and facilitating to our existence, right? We're able to chart the seasons and so on and so forth by these buruj that the sun and the moon, they go through. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla, He said, by the promised day, by the witness, and what is witness? The promised day, by the consensus of the scholars of Tafsir, is the day of resurrection. Al-Yawm al-Maw'ud is the day that Allah Azza wa Jalla has promised, the day that we will all be resurrected from our graves. And the witness, and what is witness? And again, we talked about this in the previous surah. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses a phrase that is very general, and it can give a lot of meanings, and this is from the miraculous nature of the Quran. These are not contradictory meanings, these are complementary meanings that are given through a general phrase in the Quran. So Allah says, وَالشَّاهِدِ وَمَشْهُودٍ, and I swear by the witness and that which is witnessed. So He doesn't specify a specific thing, but that witness and that which is witnessed. And the scholars have over 20 different narrations of to what these things can be. None of them contradictory, all of them complementary, because this is a general statement. One of them that is narrated with a little bit of weakness, but there are some other supporting narrations for this, is that the witness is the day of Friday, and that which is witness is the day of Arafah. Right? Friday is a witness for the believers, and the believers, they witness the day of Arafah in masses in the time of Hajj, which is coming up. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the Hajj of all those that are going to make it, inshallah, this year. Another narration mentions Friday and the day of resurrection. Friday is the witness, the day of resurrection is that which will be witnessed by, again, all of mankind. Another interpretation says, or narration mentions, that Allah is the witness and the day of resurrection is that which is witnessed, again, by Allah, by the angels, by people. And another one, Allah and mankind. Right? Allah Azza wa Jalla is witness, and who is He witness over? Mankind. The Prophet ﷺ is also described as a witness over his nation. Right? He will be a witness for or against his nation as well. And the Mashhud, the day of resurrection. One common element you see in these different narrations is that the day of resurrection is mostly mentioned. So, either the Shahid or the Mashhud, one of them is definitely the day of resurrection, which will be witnessed by all of mankind. Another narration that mentions the angels, which are witnesses over you in this life, they will be witnesses for you in the next life as well. Al-Hafadha Kiram al-Katibin, the guardian angels, the one that record your deeds, they're with you all the time. They will also be witnesses for you or against you on the day of resurrection. So this is a powerful oath that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking. What seemingly seems like 5 things is actually turned into more than 5 things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by many, many things, events of the day of resurrection. And He's swearing that قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ النَّارِ ذَاتِ الْوَقُودِ إِذْ هُمْ عَلَيْهَا قُعُودٌ وَهُمْ عَلَى مَا يَفْعَلُونَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ شُهُودٌ. That cursed were the companions of the trench containing the fire full of fuel when they were sitting near it, and they were witnesses to what they were doing against the believers. So this is a clear indication of an event that took place at some point in time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to, and He's saying that these people are definitely cursed. So who are the Ashabul Ukhdud? There are different narrations again from the Sahaba. One of the most familiar stories you might be aware of is the boy and the king, right? In which the hadith, we'll actually read it in its detail inshallah and go over some of the lessons of the hadith, because it is one narration that comes from the Prophet ﷺ directly, and it details the story, and there are some very important lessons in the story. And because it's related to the surah, we're going to go into that one inshallah. We'll end with that hadith. But there are other narrations that come from the Sahaba that show us that this incident has taken place multiple times throughout the history of mankind. This has been an instrument of torture that people have used, more than just the story of the boy and the king. In one of the narrations from the Sahaba, it mentions there was a Persian king who had an incestuous relationship with his sister and tried to make people believe that it was sanctioned by God. So in this instance, he had done something wrong. He had committed zina or fornication with his own sister. She had become pregnant, and so they formed a plan that we're going to tell the people that this is now approved by God. And so they basically were telling the people weren't buying it, and so therefore they dug a trench and lit a fire, and they wanted to force people to believe that this is the way it's going to be. This is God has sanctioned this for us, and now it's permissible, right? So this is one of the stories that is mentioned tied to this surah as well. Another instance has been narrated that it happened in the land of Babylon, where the children of Israel, Bani Israel, the followers of Musa alayhi salam, were apparently forced to give up their religion, or again be thrown into the trench that was lit in fire. And one documented case we have, and also one of the ones we have from the narrations from the Sahaba as well, is the persecution of the quote-unquote Christians of Najran, because in historical documentation they'll be referred to as the Christians of Najran. We know they were followers of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, and the followers of Prophet Isa alayhi salam were like the followers of all the prophets. They were Muslims, right? They believed in one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they followed the way of their Prophet. But through the documentation that we have, you see this story as the persecution of the Christians of Najran, which happened at the hand of a person, a man who had converted to Judaism. He's known as Dhul Nuwas or Dhul Nuwas. And he came to this land close to Ethiopia. The Ethiopians, they had good relations with the Christians of Najran. This is in the area of Yemen, and I forget the name of the other ancient kingdom that it was. But Yemen is the area where it was, and so these people were persecuted and tortured, and again a ditch was dug out for them, and there was a fire lit, and they were told either to give up their faith, convert to this one, or they would be thrown into the fire as well. And this is something that scholars of archaeology and geology, that they've found documents and things like that actually document this event. And this happened close to the Arabian Peninsula, as we know, whereas the story of the boy and the king, we're not really sure where it took place, but because it is something that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, it makes sense to go over the story, and we'll end with this hadith. It's a long hadith, we'll read it, and then we'll go over some of the lessons that are mentioned in it. But again, this hadith kind of is the most common one referred to when we hear about the people of the trench. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, there lived a king before you, and he had a sorcerer or a court magician. And as he grew old, he said to the king, I have grown old, so send me a boy that I can teach him magic and he can take my place. So the king chose a young man for him that he should be trained in sorcery on his behalf. And on his way to the magician, he would come from his village to the magician, he found a monk, a rahib, somebody that would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on his path to where this king was. And so he would sit with him, listen to him, and he was impressed by his speech, and it became that his habit that on his way to the magician, he met with the monk and he sat with him, and he would become late when he would go to study with the sorcerer. So because of this, the magician would beat him, and he complained of this to the rahib, to the worshipper, to the monk. And he said, when you feel afraid of the magician, say, members of my family had detained me. And when you feel afraid for your family, you should say, the magician had detained me. So when he would go on his way to the magician, he would stop by him, he would study with him, sit with him, listen to him, and he would be late going to the magician. On his way back to the village, he would stop by again, and he would be late going home, so he would get in trouble either way. Then the story moves on that he was going, and there was a large beast that was blocking the path of the people, some kind of large animal that was preventing them from going on their way. And he said, today I will come to know whether the magician is superior or the monk is superior. So he picked up a stone and he said, oh Allah, if the instruction of the monk is dearer to you, or better to you than the instruction of the magician, then cause death to this animal, so that the people should be able to move about freely. He threw the stone towards it, and it killed it, and the people began to move about freely, and they recognized him for what he had done. And he told this to the monk, and the monk told him that your affair has come to a stage where I fear that you would soon be put to trial. Right? And this is something that we see that happens with the righteous as well. And in case you are put to trial, don't give any information about me. Don't tell them about me and where I am and that I taught you this, and so on and so forth. So again, he became known for what he did, and he started healing those that were blind and those that were suffering from leprosy, and he began to cure people from all kinds of diseases and illnesses by the will of Allah. Then when one of the companions or the court members of the king who had gone blind, he heard about this boy, and he came to him with numerous gifts and said, if you cure me, all of these gifts will be for you. And he said, I don't cure anyone, it is Allah who cures, and if you affirm faith in Allah, I will make dua, I will supplicate to Allah to cure you as well. So he affirmed his faith in Allah, and Allah cured him, and he came to the king, sat by his side as he used to, and the king said to him, who restored your eyesight? Who made you see again? So he said, my Lord, my Rabb. And he said, therefore, it means that you have a Rabb, you have a Lord besides me. So this is the king obviously saw himself as a God, right? So he says, you have someone besides me. And he said, my Lord and your Lord is Allah. So he basically challenged his claim to that, and he spoke the truth. So the king took hold of him and he tortured him until he gave up information about the boy. Then the young man was summoned and he was brought in front of the king, and he said, it has been conveyed to me that you have become so good in your magic that you can cure the blind and those suffering from leprosy, and you can do such and such things. Obviously he was being sarcastic. But the boy said, I don't cure anyone, it is Allah who cures. And then the king took hold of him and again started torturing him until he gave up the monk. And then the monk was brought in front of him, the worshipper of Allah was brought in front of him, and he was said to him, you should turn back from your religion. He was the source of all of this, so his trial was being forced to give up the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He refused to do so, and so the king ordered for a saw to be brought, and it was placed in the middle of his head, and he was sawed into two parts. And this is the kind of torture people before, our nations, they had to go through. And again, the Prophet ﷺ is teaching the companions, look what happened before you to different people and what kind of stuff they put up with. But he was sawed into two parts, Then the court here of the king was brought, the court member of the king was brought, and it was said to him, you turn back from your religion. He refused to do so, and the same way he was killed, he was cut in half. Then the boy was brought, and it was said to him, turn back from your religion. He refused to do so, and his way of killing the boy was a little bit different, right? He had already cut people in half. He wanted something bigger for the way he got rid of the boy, because again, the boy was now famous amongst the people of the town. So he ordered his guards to take him to a mountain, and when they get on top of the mountain, they should ask him to renounce his faith. If he doesn't, then they should throw him down the mountain. So they took him up, and the boy made a dua. He said, oh Allah, save me from them in any way that you like. Right? Save me from them in any way that you like. The mountain shook, and they all fell down, and he came walking back to the king. And he said to him, what happened to your people, the companions that were with you? He said, Allah has saved me from them. Then he again handed him to some more guards, and he said, take him in a boat into the middle of the ocean and do the same thing. Ask him to renounce his faith. If he doesn't, throw him overboard into the water. So they took him, and he made kind of the same dua. He said, oh Allah, save me from them and what they want to do, or save me from them however you like. And it was again, the boat overturned, they all drowned, and he was able to make it back, and he came back to the court of the king. Right? He doesn't just come back and hide, he goes back to the court of the king. And the king says to him, what has happened to your companions? He said the same thing, Allah save me from them. And then he said, you cannot kill me until you do exactly what I ask you to do. Meaning you cannot kill me unless you do it in the way that I tell you to do. And he said, you should gather the people, and you should tie me to the trunk of a tree, then take hold of an arrow from my quiver and say, in the name of Allah, the Lord of the young boy, then shoot the arrow. So basically, Bismillah. Right? You're saying, in the name of Allah, Lord of this boy, and then shoot the arrow, and if you do that, you will be able to kill me. So the king called the people, he did exactly like he said. He tied the trunk of a tree, he took an arrow from his quiver, and he said, in the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy, and he shot the arrow, and it hit his temple. And the boy placed his hand on his temple where the arrow had hit him, and he died. And the people saw this, and when they saw this, they said, we affirm our faith in the Lord of this young man. Because they had already warmed up to him, he had been curing them by the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they had known that the king was also already claiming himself to be God, and so on and so forth. So when they saw this, they brought faith in Allah openly, right, in front of even the king. And so at this point, it was when the king, his people said to him, do you not see that Allah has actually done what you aimed at averting, aimed at avoiding? So the people have affirmed their faith in Allah, and so he commanded for ditches to be dug, and when they were dug, a fire was lit in them, and it was said to the people, he who does not turn back from this religion will be thrown into the fire, or they would be forced to jump in it. And the people, they instead chose to jump in the fire and not to give up their faith. And the Prophet ﷺ at the end of this hadith mentions that till a woman came with her child, her infant child in her hand, and she felt hesitant in jumping into the fire, and the child spoke and said to her, mother, endure this, do this, for this is the haqq, this is the truth, and you will be saved. And so she jumped in the fire with the child as well, because there was really no choice for them other than that. And in other narrations from the companions, we mentioned that out of Allah's mercy, their souls were taken before they even went into the fire. So Allah Azza wa Jal, even though the king thought he was torturing and punishing them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow them to be tortured and punished, which we know is one of the ways of the martyrs as well. But he took their souls before they even touched the fire or had any of the pain. Now this hadith is a long hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, when he tells a long story, there's obviously stories or lessons from the story that we need to get. So we're going to finish inshallah with some of the lessons in the story and what we can learn from this narration that the Prophet ﷺ took great care in narrating to us. One of the things the scholars actually mention is why the magician chose a young boy. Why did he choose a young boy to teach magic to? And we know this, that children at a young age that is the time they learn things the best. Right? So one of the lessons the scholars actually take from this is if you want to teach your children good and beneficial things, utilize their early ages, the time when they're young. That is the time when information and knowledge and practice will really stick with them, when they're young. Not when they're much older. It's harder to teach people when they're much older. The rahib, or the worshipper, or the monk, as is translated in this hadith, he told the boy, also in this hadith, to tell a lie. Right? So when he was late going to the magician, late going back to his family, he essentially tell him that you're being delayed by the other people, even though it's sitting with him and learning from him that he's being delayed by. So the scholars also, from this and other narrations that we have in our faith, they tell us that under extreme circumstances, right? Under extreme circumstances, things that are prohibited can become permissible. Obviously, if it's a life or death situation, right? So we have this ayah also in the Quran that talks about you cannot have alcohol or the meat of swine and so on and so forth, unless you are obviously in a dire situation or you're forced to, and so on and so forth. But even under extreme circumstances, things that may be impermissible can become permissible for the time that is required for them to be life-saving. Also seeking Allah's counsel. So when the boy, he took the rock and he said, "Oh Allah," he did what he knew, right? He said, "Oh Allah, if the affair of the monk is better, then kill this animal and let the people go on their way." This is seeking Allah's counsel. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he taught us how to do this, what we know as Salatul Istikhara, the prayer of seeking counsel. And this is a prayer that we really need to learn, understand, and use a lot more than we possibly already do in our lives. Some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ said that he used to teach us the dua of istikhara, the dua of seeking Allah's counsel, like he would teach us an ayah from the Quran. So this was something the Prophet ﷺ constantly taught them to do, to ask Allah for guidance in the decisions that you have to make. And just basically, we can look this up for later, but there's 2 rak'at that you pray, and then there's a dua that we make for istikhara. And then you seek also the counsel of the people, the trusted people around you, and you make a decision and you go with it, and the results are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever happens is whatever is best for you. And the beautiful thing about the dua of istikhara is that no matter what happens, it's exactly what you made dua for. Because you ask Allah in the dua, you say, "Oh Allah, if this is good for me, then make it happen for me. And if it's bad for me, then take it away from me, and give me something better than this." And then you go forth and you make a decision and you put your foot forward and you start doing stuff. And whether or not, whatever happens, whether you get what you're trying to do or you don't get what you were trying to do, both of those things are what you ask for. You ask Allah for, if this is good, give it to me. If it's not, take it away. So, this is subhanAllah, an amazing thing that Allah has given us for our psyche as well. That no matter what happens, it's exactly what you ask for. Your dua is accepted either way, because you've left it in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the way we use the istikhara. It's not necessary, as we know in some of our cultures, that if you do the istikhara, you'll see a dream, and whatever you see in the dream. That's not how it is. Unfortunately, in some countries, they have programs called istikhara, completely messing with the actual concept of what this is. People will call in and ask somebody for, "I had this dream," or "I have this issue, tell me what it means." It's almost like fortune telling, but they call the show istikhara. Right? And we have this in some Muslim countries, right? So this is not what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. The istikhara is a prayer. You pray by yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are no intermediaries, nobody else is involved. And whatever happens is exactly what you ask for. Your dua will be answered no matter what happens. Some of the other lessons we learned from this hadith, again, obviously the boy reached a level where he was tried by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we know this is the sunnah or the nature of righteousness as well, right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ashaddu nasi bala'an al-anbiya, thumma al-amthalu fal-amthal," that the people most severely tried by Allah are the prophets themselves, right? So righteousness is not something that means you necessarily have a peaceful life in this world, right? People will always challenge that righteousness. So the most severely tried people are the prophets, then those who are most like them, and then those who are most like them. So the path of righteousness is a path that is actually full of trials. But when you get closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a beautiful hadith in which Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, Hadith Qudsi, that I will declare war against him who shows hostility to a pious worshipper of mine. So even though people may try you, Allah Azza wa Jal himself is there to back you up. And the most beloved thing to me by which my slaves come closest to me is the obligatory acts that I have made obligatory for them. So taking care of your obligations first, you get the closest to Allah. And then he said, my slave keeps coming closer and closer to me through performing extra deeds of worship until I love him, and when I love him, I become his hearing by which he hears, his seeing by which he sees, his hand by which he strikes or he stretches out, and his leg by which he walks. And if he asks me for something, I will give it to him, and if he seeks my protection, I will protect him. Right? So these are levels that we can get closer and closer to Allah by worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing the obligations first, and then taking care of extra acts of worship as well. And also we see in the hadith the humility of the righteous and the pious people, whereas the boy, again, he was able to cure Allah he was able to cure people by making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when people came to him and said, you can cure, you can help us, he says, no, I don't do anything. It's Allah that cures. But if you affirm faith in Allah, I will make dua to Allah, and He may cure you as well. So again, just saying that I'm making dua to Allah, and it's up to Allah Azza wa Jalla whether or not He does the cure. Whenever people attribute goodness towards us, we need to recognize the source of goodness is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? No matter what it is, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessing. ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَن يَشَاءُ. It's the blessing and favor of Allah, and He gives it to whoever He wills. So He can give it to us sometimes, He can take it from us sometimes, He can give it to other people. But this is the humility of the pious people as well, that they recognize where the source of goodness actually comes from, rather than making it a source of arrogance for themselves and saying, yes, I'm able to do this, because of me you were cured, because of my dua this happened. No, it's Allah Azza wa Jal that makes it happen, and we are not really part of the process. Also, again, the most important lesson that was given for the believers is patience in the face of actual physical torture. And this is something that, again, when there are certain rules that apply to this as well. That when they tortured them to find out about people, they gave in, right? But when they tortured them to give up their faith, they didn't do it, right? And so there are also times when you're able to give in and times when you're not able to give in, right? So, for example, some of the scholars, they mentioned that it is permissible to say words of even disbelief, kufr, if you are being tortured, but again, it depends on who you are. It depends on who you are. So you had early Muslims, they were the weak, they were the poor, and they were tortured, and some of them gave in, and they said words against Allah, against the Prophet ﷺ. And again, Allah Azza wa Jalla knew they didn't mean to, they were forced to, and He sent an ayah from the Quran. It's what's in your heart that matters, and Allah knows what's in your heart, and these words don't matter. But the scholars, they said, if you are someone that is a leader for the people, then it's not permissible for you to actually give in to that torture, which is interesting, right? Which is what happened here. So when they were only torturing them to find out about the other people, they gave in because it was painful. But when they tortured them to leave their faith, they did not give in. Because there was a whole crowd, a whole village of people, a whole town of people that were following them, right? That they were examples for. So at that point, they did not give in. Even though they gave in for the first one, which had a lesser value attached to it. So if you are a leader in society, if you are somebody that the people are going to follow, the scholars have mentioned, you have to be patient. You cannot give in even to physical torture. You need to be patient. And this is a true mark of a leader as well. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us to be able to understand from not just these ayat, but also the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This hadith has so many more lessons. We should go back and read it and read the interpretation and the lessons of the scholars about it as well. It's a very long hadith. That means it has very, very many lessons. But again, just the ones that pertain to these ayat, we mentioned them. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive us anything wrong that we say. And anything that is correct comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to help us understand. And this is why we call this series Ways of Guidance, right? Help us understand, make the connection. A lot of our people are being tortured, are being harmed in the world today. And Allah Azza wa Jal is not unaware of what is happening, right? Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in this surah later on, He says Allah is witness to what they were doing, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware. And one of the ways that Allah Azza wa Jal strengthens a weakened people is by putting them through trials. This is one of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when people become weak spiritually, when they become weak on the inside, Allah Azza wa Jal puts them through trials for their betterment. And we know that, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the people who are most severely tried are the prophets, then those who are most like them and those who are most like them. So, this trials and this torture and all of this stuff that happens, it happens to good people. And it's meant to happen to good people because the good people need to be stronger, right? When the stronger you are, the more you're able to do for the rest of mankind as well. So Allah Azza wa Jal has His wisdoms, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of our brothers and sisters that are suffering, but we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to also strengthen them in their iman, in their faith, and to make them an example for the rest of us as well. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. If there are any questions or comments, we'll take them inshallah. Yes.
So the boy did something wrong by giving in, you said?
No, because again,
you said if you're a leader in society, you can't give.
So there was two things, right? When he was tortured just to give in the name of the monk, that wasn't anything that affected anybody else. So he gave in because it was painful. But when he was asked to give up his faith, he didn't give in because he was a leader for and the people were going to follow him. So there's a distinction here. Yeah.
So what I meant was so the boy was one who told the king to tie him out on the tree bark. So why did he do that?
So this is wisdom, right? This is wisdom. He knows he's going to be put to death. He knows he's already been caught. There's no way out. The two people before him have already been killed. He knows he's going to die. So he says, well, if I'm going to die, why not go in a way that at least publicizes and really destroys his argument that he is God, right? So he makes him say in the name of Allah, and he shoots the arrow, and only when he does that, he's able to kill the boy, and the people see it. And so even the ones that may have had some doubts, right, now they're firm that, okay, this guy is not God, Allah is the only God, and this boy was right. So even in his death, he was, he was basically doing da'wah. He was doing something that was very, very excellent. So, I mean, this is wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in the hearts of people, right, in some severe situations or severe moments. Anything else that we have?
Sorry.
Like,
As a slight addition, some of the scholars mentioned that one of the reasons why the king didn't kill the boy immediately. He saw two people being killed, and he was taken away. So maybe the boy might actually reflect and change his mind, and also because he was young, so that if he did change his mind, the king were able to use him for a long, amount of time to be close to the king. You understand? So some of the scholars they bring this. Another point I want to make from the hadith is we see that sometimes even in a lot of cases throughout the history of Islam this has happened, whereby the student would actually be better than the teacher.
Yeah.
Now, because it's fadl min Allah, it's from Allah, it's a fadl from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives whoever wants to give it to. So for the method that you taught a student, and there are so many scholars of Islam, that you don't know their teachers, but you know them. So this is another point I wanted to make.
Like this hadith is why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned such a long story. I mean, you can probably find a lesson in every single line. There's a reason why the Prophet ﷺ, he usually would not narrate long things, right? Jawab al-Academy would say short things and they would be sufficient, but there has to be a reason why he mentions this whole story in such detail. And so when we go back and study and read over this, we get, we can draw lessons from this, especially based on the situations we have to face, right? Even sometimes we know Allah Azza wa Jalla gives us examples of extreme situations so that we can draw examples for the lesson, and this is exactly what's happening here, right? The people of Mecca did not go through the kind of torture that these people went through, and Allah is giving them an example of an extreme situation so they can know how to deal with their situation, which is much, much less in comparison. And our situations are much, much less in comparison than even what they had to go through. But there are lessons in this, right? When you feel like you're being tortured, when you feel like you're being treated unfairly, when you feel like the people are just running over you and they're all over the place. And we see this even now in the situation we're in, right? In the country, and the way people talk about us, the way we're being portrayed, the way we have no voice, somebody else controls the dialogue, and so on and so forth. These are all tests and trials that Allah Azza wa Jalla is putting us through, right? To make us stronger. And we have examples of how you deal with that. And you be patient, you stand up for what is true, you give in only when it's something minor that you have to save your life for. Okay, right? Somebody corners you and says, say this about your faith, or otherwise I'm going to shoot you. And you do it, right? But when you're on national TV, or when you're in front, or you're a leader or something, you're not allowed to give in. You're not allowed to give in to these kinds of demands or whatever it is. You're supposed to stand firm, and so that the people can follow and see strength in leaders as well. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair.
Like you said, numerous faida from there were a lot. Good companionship is part of it. There are a lot. Tawheed, ikhlas. It's just you understand.
Yeah.
So the mother was and we are going to be tested. And we just we pray for istiqamah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very, 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 very important. Sometimes you might think, oh, I'm strong, but when you're faced with the test itself, you might shiver.
Yeah.
And you need people to strengthen your faith and say, you're on the right track. This you're on the right path. And it came in form of a baby. And we need it sometimes. Sometimes you might think, hey, what's going on? You need good people around you, all the time. So it's like you said, it's a beautiful story. And inna Allah ala kulli shay'in shaheed. Allah is a witness, to everything. And Allah has made dhulm, He's made it haram upon Himself. So whatever we are going through, Allah is not oppressing us. And He sees, and wal aqibatu lil muttaqin. And the end is going to be for the pious. So once you understand these, and like the Imam actually said, what are we going through right now? The Prophet ﷺ told the companions when they came to complain to him, he was leaning there, and he got up and said, "You are in a haste. People were cut into half because of this kalima. You see it from the story. Cut into half. Why? Yeah. So it's a beautiful story. I don't want to take too much time, but
it's full of lessons. So I encourage people to read the hadith. The hadith is in Sahih Muslim. You can look it up, even the story of the boy and the king. They've even made like a little animated whatever story out of it for children. to show the kids and stuff like that. It's very bad quality, yes, but it's there. We made a long time ago. But it's a story that, even for kids there's so many lessons, right? For adults there's so many lessons, right? It's endless, the faida. As in most of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, and the Quran as well, right? The fawaid are endless. The Quran is the speech of Allah, and the speech of Allah is eternal. Inshallah, that will end.
One last thing, if I'm not mistaken, I think during the time of Omar, they found his body. There's a narration that they found his body and his whatever. Yes, and they removed them, and the blood was actually, nam.
Yeah.
And Omar told them to go and rebury him, and to make sure that people didn't know where he was
I
buried.
didn't know this.
Nam.
That's
I
beautiful.
was actually checking to see if I was going to say, but I didn't say. But there's a narration
Look it
now.
up, yeah.
There's a narration now, and I'll try to look it up, and you can look it up as well now. So he was a shaheed, and Prophet has told us, no, Yom Al-Qiyamah, the
They will
shaheed
rise up as they were.
yes,
With the blood flowing from their hands.
Nam. So,
Subhanallah.
alhamdulillah.
جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.